It starts with something that feels all too familiar: a public street, a woman minding her own business, and a man with a badge who thinks he's above the law. But this isn't just a misunderstanding. This isn't just a mistake. This is a setup. When a reckless officer decides to make an example out of the wrong black woman, he thinks it's just another day on the job. What he doesn't know is that she's not just anyone. She's the one woman who has the power to take him down, not with violence, but with truth, with the law, and with the strength of an entire community standing behind her. What happens next is bigger than one street, bigger than one city. It's a fight for dignity, for justice, and for every voice that's ever been silenced. And trust me, you won't believe how it ends. Let us know what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. You could feel it in the air. The city of Charleston had never looked more alive than it did on that warm Saturday afternoon. The streets were buzzing with energy, people laughing, talking, and celebrating as the city's annual Civil Rights Parade brought together generations, communities, and families from all over South Carolina. Flags waved proudly in the hands of elderly veterans, young children danced to the beat of marching bands, and the smell of fresh popcorn, grilled barbecue, and sweet tea filled every corner of the historic downtown district. Locals and tourists gathered along King Street, dressed in their Sunday best, eager to honor the brave men and women who had fought for freedom, equality, and dignity. You could see the pride on their faces. Some wore shirts with the faces of civil rights icons: Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, while others held signs with messages of hope, justice, and unity. It was more than a parade. It was a living, breathing reminder of how far they had come and how far there was still to go. And in the middle of it all, walking with a quiet grace that turned heads without even trying, was Vanessa Monroe. She wasn't part of any float. She wasn't holding a sign. She didn't need to. There was something about the way she carried herself that made people stop and notice. Maybe it was the way her white summer dress flowed effortlessly as she moved through the crowd. Maybe it was the way the sun caught the golden hoops hanging from her ears, or the smooth, confident steps she took in her sandals. Or maybe it was something deeper, something in her presence that felt powerful, almost like she belonged to a different kind of story that no one had fully uncovered yet. Vanessa Monroe was just 27 years old, but if you looked closely, you'd see the wisdom of generations written all over her face. Born and raised right here in Charleston, she grew up in the shadow of legends. Her father, the late Samuel Monroe, was once one of the city's most respected civil rights attorneys, a man who had spent his life defending the voiceless. Vanessa had followed in his footsteps, though few in the crowd that day knew just how far she'd come. Today, she wasn't here as a lawyer. She wasn't here as a speaker. She was just here as a daughter walking these streets to honor her father's memory, to quietly reflect on the legacy he left behind. She hadn't planned to draw attention to herself. She wasn't looking to be seen. But when you carry yourself with the kind of dignity Vanessa did, sometimes attention finds you whether you ask for it or not. She smiled softly as she passed an elderly couple sitting on a bench, their hands intertwined, their eyes lighting up when they noticed her. She nodded respectfully to a group of teenage girls taking selfies in front of a mural of John Lewis. She even paused for a moment to help a young boy pick up a toy car he'd dropped on the sidewalk. Every move she made was effortless, genuine, kind. But not everyone watching her had kind intentions. Leaning against a marked patrol car just a few yards away stood Officer Brad Kelsey, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched. His eyes locked on Vanessa like a predator sizing up prey. While the rest of the city had gathered to celebrate unity and progress, Kelsey stood there like a dark cloud ready to rain on everyone's parade. He'd worked this event for years, and every year it felt the same to him: a slap in the face, a reminder that people he'd been raised to look down on were now the ones being honored, celebrated, lifted up. It didn't sit right with him. It never had. And seeing a woman like Vanessa Monroe walking around like she owned the place, that was more than he could take. Kelsey didn't recognize her by name. He didn't know her story. All he saw was a young black woman who dared to stand tall, who dared to look untouchable. And in his twisted mind, that made her a target. He leaned into his radio, speaking just loud enough for his partner to hear. Possible loiterer near the fountain. Female, white dress, suspicious behavior, he muttered. His partner glanced at him, confused. You serious? She's just walking. Kelsey didn't answer. He was already pushing himself off the car, cracking his knuckles as he took slow, calculated steps toward the crowd toward her. And Vanessa? She felt it. She didn't know why, but something in her gut tightened. That strange, invisible sense that someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder, locking eyes with Kelsey for just a second. She could feel the shift in the air, the way the energy around her seemed to darken, but she kept walking. She wasn't going to let anyone ruin this moment for her. Not today. Not here. Not when her father's legacy was still alive in every face she passed. And so, with her head held high, Vanessa Monroe kept moving toward the heart of the celebration, unaware that the man following her had already decided this day wouldn't end the way she imagined. There's something dangerous about a man with power who feels invisible. That's exactly what Officer Brad Kelsey was dangerous. You see, Kelsey didn't just wear the badge, he wore the ego that came with it. And the truth is, he'd been hiding behind that badge for years, using it as a weapon instead of a shield. People in Charleston knew his name, but no one ever dared to challenge him. Why? Because he had friends in all the right places, or maybe all the wrong places, depending on how you look at it. Kelsey had grown up on the south side of Charleston, in a neighborhood where boys were taught that their worth came from controlling people, controlling situations, controlling the narrative. And Kelsey had learned that lesson well. His father had been a police officer too, a man who believed that keeping order meant keeping people in their place. That's how Kelsey was raised. That's what had been drilled into him since he was old enough to ride in the front seat of a squad car. And now, standing in uniform at one of the most diverse, joyful, and pride-filled events Charleston had to offer, Kelsey felt like the walls were closing in on him. He wasn't here to protect anyone. He wasn't here to serve the community. He was here to remind people that power still belonged to men like him. And in his mind, someone like Vanessa Monroe needed to be reminded of that. He watched her as she moved through the crowd, his lip curling in disgust. Who did she think she was? Walking around like she didn't have a care in the world. Smiling like she belonged. Acting like she couldn't be touched. That's what burned him the most, the confidence, the ease. Because deep down, Brad Kelsey hated what he couldn't control. And right now, Vanessa Monroe felt completely out of his reach. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his boots pressing into the cracked pavement beneath him. His partner, Officer Ruiz, leaned against the patrol car, arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick like it was just another lazy Saturday. "Let it go, Kelsey," Ruiz muttered, without even looking up. "She's not doing anything." But Kelsey didn't hear him. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. His mind was already made up. He'd seen enough of these so-called celebrations, where people like Vanessa were paraded around like heroes, while cops like him stood on the sidelines like they were the enemy. He wasn't about to be invisible today. Not today. He watched her stop near a group of older women selling handmade fans and beaded jewelry. She laughed softly at something one of them said, reaching into her small handbag to pull out a few dollars. She was supporting local vendors, lifting people up. It should have been a beautiful moment. But Kelsey saw something else, an opportunity. He adjusted his belt, glanced at Ruiz one last time, and started walking toward her, his steps slow, deliberate, like a snake coiling itself tighter and tighter, waiting to strike. Ruiz called after him under his breath, "Kelsey, come on, man, don't do this." But Kelsey didn't stop. His mind had already built the story. He'd seen it play out 100 times before call it in as a suspicious individual, claim she matched the description of someone reported earlier, plant the narrative before anyone could ask questions. All he needed was a reason, any reason. And with that badge on his chest, he didn't even need it to be a good one. He reached for his radio again. "Dispatch, this is Officer Kelsey, Unit 47. I've got a possible code 53, female, early 20s, white dress, acting suspicious near vendor booths on King and Calhoun, requesting backup." His voice was calm, like he was reading from a script. But inside, he was boiling. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because deep down, she'd done everything right. She existed without fear, and in his twisted world, that was enough to make her guilty. Vanessa had no idea what was coming. As she handed the vendor her money, she felt that strange tension in the air again, like something pressing down on her from behind. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Kelsey's for just a heartbeat, and in that single moment, she knew. She didn't have to hear the words. She didn't have to see the badge. She'd been here before, different city, different day, different face. But the energy? The way his eyes told her that he thought he had the right to own this moment, that was all too familiar. She took a slow breath, squaring her shoulders, forcing herself to keep her composure. Because if there was one thing her father had taught her, it was this: you don't give them your fear. Not in public. Not in private. Not ever. She turned back to the vendor, thanking the woman softly before slipping her change into her bag. But her heart was pounding now, her instinct screaming at her that this wasn't over. Not even close. Kelsey was getting closer. The crowd was thinning just enough for him to move freely now. He cracked his neck, rolling his shoulders like a man getting ready for a fight. And as the marching band's drums echoed through the streets, drowning out the warning signs, Kelsey took his final steps toward Vanessa Monroe, ready to make his move. It was almost like watching a storm gather on the edge of a perfect summer day. The sun was still shining, the crowd still laughing, but if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, you could feel the temperature shift. It wasn't the weather. It was something colder, heavier, settling in the air around Vanessa Monroe. She could feel him getting closer. She didn't need to turn around to confirm it. The weight of his presence was already pushing down on her back like a shadow stretching too far. She tightened her grip on her small handbag and took a step forward, but it didn't matter. She knew, deep down, this wasn't going to be something she could just walk away from. Not today. Kelsey, on the other hand, was already tasting the victory. In his mind, this moment belonged to him. He didn't care about the parade. He didn't care about the people celebrating. All he cared about was proving a point, reminding everyone, and himself, that no one was above him, that no one was untouchable. And Vanessa? In his eyes, she was the perfect example of someone who needed to be put back in her place. He quickened his pace just slightly, weaving through small groups of people, his jaw clenched tighter with every step, his fists curling without even realizing it, the voice in his head screaming louder than any marching band around him. How dare she walk through his city like that? Like she didn't answer to anyone, like she could stand taller than him. He wasn't going to let that happen. Vanessa heard the footsteps behind her grow louder, closer. She paused for a split second, pretending to check her phone, giving herself just a moment to gather her breath. She glanced to her right, spotting a family sitting on the steps of a nearby church, two elderly grandparents and their young grandson waving little paper flags. For a brief moment, she thought about walking toward them, standing near other people, maybe forcing Kelsey to back off in front of witnesses. But something told her that even that wouldn't stop him. She'd seen men like him before. When they were set on proving their power, they didn't care who was watching. Sometimes, having an audience just made it worse. She took another deep breath and kept moving. Her steps slower now, more cautious. Every sense in her body on high alert. Kelsey knew she felt him. That only made it sweeter. He wasn't even trying to hide anymore. He wanted her to know. He wanted her to feel it coming. And then, "Ma'am, stop right there." The words hit her like a slap to the back of the head, loud enough for nearby bystanders to turn their heads, loud enough to make conversations around them go silent for a beat. Vanessa froze. She could feel every pair of eyes turning toward her. People were watching. Cameras might already be recording. She knew what this looked like to strangers. A police officer giving an order. A black woman standing still. All the stereotypes, all the assumptions. They were already filling the air around her like smoke in a room with no windows. She turned slowly, locking eyes with Kelsey for the second time that day. But this time, she didn't let her fear show, not even a crack. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice calm, steady, but cold enough to let him know she wasn't about to play dumb. Kelsey's lips curled into a crooked, condescending smile, the kind of smile that said he was in charge, and he knew it. "Step over here, please," he ordered, motioning toward the empty space near the edge of the sidewalk. Vanessa didn't move. Not yet. She glanced around, making sure to lock eyes with a few people in the crowd, people who were already watching closely. She wanted witnesses. She needed them. "I'm standing right here, officer," she replied firmly. "You can say whatever you need to say in front of these people." A few quiet gasps rippled through the crowd. People knew what that meant. She was pushing back, and she wasn't doing it in the shadows. Kelsey's face tightened. He took 2 steps closer, closing the distance between them until they were standing barely 2 feet apart. He leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "You really think these people are going to save you?" he hissed under his breath. "You think you're special?" Vanessa didn't flinch. "I don't need saving," she whispered back. "And you're going to regret this." Kelsey's eye twitched. His nostrils flared. He hated that she wasn't breaking. "You fit the description of a suspect reported earlier," he said suddenly, raising his voice again so everyone around could hear. "Step aside. I need to search you for weapons or illegal substances." Vanessa's blood boiled. She knew the game he was playing. False accusations, fake reports, the kind of script men like him used to humiliate people like her in public. She stood her ground. "No, you don't," she answered, loud enough for the bystanders to hear every word. "What's your badge number, officer?" That's when the energy in the air shifted again. People started pulling out their phones. Some whispered to each other. A few started recording. Kelsey noticed too. And for the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. But it was too late. He was already in it. And there was no backing down now. Not for a man like him. Not today. Kelsey knew he had the attention now. The bystanders were watching, some already holding up their phones, others whispering to one another as they glanced nervously between Vanessa and the officer standing way too close to her. For a split second, he considered backing off. But just as fast as the thought crossed his mind, his ego crushed it. Backing off would make him look weak, and Kelsey refused to look weak, especially in front of people he spent his whole life looking down on. He'd pushed too far to stop now, and the longer Vanessa stood her ground, the deeper his anger cut. He took one more step forward, towering over her now. His voice dropped to that threatening tone every black person in America knows too well, the one that sounds polite enough for an audience but sharp enough to cut you in half if you make the wrong move. "Ma'am, you're refusing a lawful order," he announced, raising his voice so everyone around could hear him clearly. "I need you to step over here, now." Vanessa didn't move. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Every muscle in her body tensed, every instinct screaming to hold her ground. But her mind was already racing, calculating. She couldn't afford to give him an excuse to escalate, not when he was already looking for one. So, with slow, measured control, she shifted her weight and took a single step toward the spot he had motioned to. She wasn't surrendering, she was calculating, giving herself just enough room to keep this public, to stay visible, to keep the witnesses locked in. Kelsey smiled like he'd won. He lifted his hand, pointing to her bag. "Hand me the purse," he ordered. Vanessa tightened her grip, her jaw clenched. "On what grounds?" she asked calmly. Kelsey's smile widened. He was loving every second of this. "Suspicion of carrying illegal substances," he replied, loud enough for the crowd. "You matched the description of a reported suspect." That was a lie, of course. There was no suspect. No report. It was a setup. A script he'd played out 100 times before. But this time, something felt different. The crowd wasn't dispersing like they usually did. They weren't turning their heads and walking away. No, they were getting closer, circling in, watching even harder. Vanessa knew it too. She didn't hand over her bag. Instead, she lifted it high, holding it with one hand, and turning to face the crowd. "This officer is harassing me without cause," she declared loudly, her voice cutting through the uneasy silence. "I have done nothing wrong. I am not under arrest. I am not suspected of any crime." Gasps rippled through the people around them. A few started to speak up. "She didn't do anything. She's just standing there. What's wrong with you, man?" But Kelsey didn't flinch. He was committed now. With one swift motion, he reached out and snatched the bag from her hand, yanking it away before she could react. The crowd erupted in shouts, people demanding to know what he was doing. Vanessa took a sharp breath, fighting to keep her composure. This was exactly what he wanted, to embarrass her, to humiliate her in front of everyone. But what he didn't know was that Vanessa Monroe had been trained for moments like this. She had spent years in courtrooms facing men far more powerful than Brad Kelsey, and she wasn't about to lose her composure now. "Return my property," she demanded firmly. "You have no warrant. You have no probable cause." But Kelsey wasn't listening. He opened her bag, digging through it in front of everyone, looking for something he could twist into a justification for this mess he'd created. Nothing. A phone, a small wallet, a few receipts, lip balm, nothing else. The crowd started to murmur louder now. Some people laughed bitterly, realizing there was nothing suspicious about her at all. Others shook their heads, disgusted by what they were seeing. Kelsey's face started to flush. His hands curled tighter into fists as he shoved her bag back toward her. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. He stepped in even closer, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're real smart, huh?" he hissed. "Think all these people are going to protect you?" Vanessa stood taller, meeting his glare without flinching. "I don't need protection," she said again, steady as ever. "I need your badge number, right now." Kelsey snapped. Without warning, he grabbed her arm again, jerking her around so her back was toward him. Gasps rang out as he forced her toward the edge of the fountain, right in front of dozens of horrified witnesses. "No one's above the law," Kelsey barked, his voice shaking with fury. "Not even you!" Vanessa struggled to pull free, planting her feet as firmly as she could. She could feel his grip tightening, feel the roughness of his hand digging into her skin. She knew where this was headed. She'd seen it too many times before. The humiliation, the power play, the public scene. And as the cameras kept rolling, as the crowd started yelling louder for him to stop, Vanessa Monroe knew one thing for certain. Brad Kelsey was about to cross a line he could never come back from. And when he did, it wouldn't be her reputation on the line. It would be his. She didn't fight back, not the way Kelsey was daring her to. That's what made him even angrier. Vanessa Monroe knew exactly what was happening. She knew what game he was playing. And the fact that she wasn't giving him the dramatic, emotional reaction he wanted, that cut deeper than anything else. She stood there, locked in his grip, feeling his fingers tightening like a trap around her arm. Every part of her body burned with anger. But her mind was steady, sharp, calculating every second. She wasn't about to give him anything he could use to twist this narrative, not when so many eyes were watching. Not when the cameras were already rolling. So, she did the one thing she knew would make him crack. She smiled. It wasn't a big, flashy smile. It wasn't defiant or arrogant. It was subtle, calm. A smile that told him, without saying a word, "I know exactly who you are, and I'm not afraid of you." That's when Kelsey lost control. He yanked her closer, leaning down to hiss in her ear. "You think you're better than me?" Vanessa didn't flinch. Her smile stayed right there on her lips, steady as stone. "Every second you hold me like this," she whispered back, "you're making yourself look worse." The crowd started shifting. People were getting louder, more restless. "Let her go! You're crossing the line, officer. She didn't do anything wrong." Someone even shouted, "I'm live streaming this!" And Kelsey's head snapped toward the voice for just a second. His jaw locked tight. His breath got heavier. He could feel it slipping away, this moment of control he thought he owned. It was getting away from him, fast. But instead of stepping back, instead of making the smart move, Kelsey doubled down. He spun Vanessa around to face him, pushing her backward toward the stone edge of the fountain. "What's in the bag, huh?" he snapped again, even though he'd already searched it. "What are you hiding?" Vanessa didn't move. She stood tall, staring him dead in the eyes. "I already told you," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have no reason to search me. I've broken no laws." Kelsey's face flushed red with rage, and that's when he did it. His hand shot out, grabbing the thin strap of her dress right at the shoulder. The crowd gasped. People shouted louder now, but it was like Kelsey didn't even hear them anymore. His tunnel vision had taken over. "You wanna act like you're better than everyone?" he growled, tightening his grip on her dress. "Let's show them who you really are." And with one violent jerk, he tore the side of her dress, the fabric ripping loudly in front of everyone. The right shoulder of her dress slipped, exposing part of her back, leaving her standing there, humiliated under the burning South Carolina sun. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Phones shot higher in the air. Voices rang out louder than ever. "Hey, you can't do that!" "Assault! That's assault! Let her go!" But Kelsey didn't stop. His breathing was heavy now. his face twisted with something darker than anger, something that looked a lot like satisfaction. Vanessa felt the cool breeze hit her exposed skin. For a split second, her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the sting of humiliation creeping up her spine, but she refused to let it show. She reached up slowly, calmly, pulling the torn fabric back over her shoulder, her hands steady even though her heart was racing. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't fall apart. She just stood there. And that's when the crowd exploded. People started pushing closer, shouting, demanding that someone stop him. A few brave souls even stepped toward Kelsey, raising their hands, not to fight but to create a human barrier between him and Vanessa. Kelsey looked around, panicked for the first time. He hadn't expected this. He thought people would scatter, back down, walk away like they usually did when things got ugly. But not today. Today, the people weren't going anywhere, and standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the whole thing unfold with his fists clenched tightly at his sides, was Reverend Elijah Green. The old civil rights leader had seen a lot in his lifetime. He'd marched in the 60s. He'd stood on courthouse steps in the 70s. He'd buried friends and family who had paid the price for standing up to men like Brad Kelsey. But today hit differently, because standing there in front of him was Vanessa Monroe, the daughter of the man he once called brother in the fight for justice. His voice, deep and booming with authority, cut through the chaos like a blade. "Vanessa!" he shouted, stepping forward, his voice echoing through the street. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Reverend Green moved closer, every step filled with the weight of history. Kelsey froze, his breath caught in his throat, his eyes flicked toward the voice, confusion flickering across his face, because suddenly he realized this wasn't just a random woman, this wasn't just some face in the crowd. And in that split second, Brad Kelsey started to understand. He wasn't in control anymore, and he was about to find out just who he had messed with. Kelsey's throat tightened. For the first time all day, the air didn't feel like it belonged to him anymore. He could feel the shift, like the ground itself had moved beneath his boots. His hand was still hanging there, half curled from where he'd ripped Vanessa's dress. But now he wasn't so sure what to do with it. He felt exposed. And when Reverend Elijah Green called out again louder this time, Kelsey knew this wasn't going to end the way he thought it would. "Vanessa Monroe?" Reverend Green's voice boomed again, cutting through the crowd like a pastor's sermon on a Sunday morning. People turned, heads swiveled. Some whispered her name like they had just heard something sacred. Others gasped softly, as if suddenly realizing they knew who she was. Kelsey's mind raced. Monroe? The name rang in his ears, but he couldn't quite place it. All he could see was the growing wall of people between him and the old reverend, who was pushing forward with the authority of a man who wasn't afraid of anything, not even a badge. Vanessa stood frozen for just a second, feeling the weight of every eye in the street. Part of her wanted to disappear, to hide from the humiliation of standing there with her dress torn, her dignity stripped in front of strangers. But then, she heard that voice. Reverend Green, a man she hadn't seen in years but had grown up hearing stories about. She turned her head slowly, locking eyes with him. And in that moment, it all came flooding back, the memories of sitting on her father's lap as a child, listening to him talk about the great Reverend Green, the man who had marched alongside him, the man who had stood in courtrooms demanding justice when no one else dared, the man who had been like an uncle to her family when the cameras weren't rolling and the crowds had gone home. And here he was, standing just a few feet away, looking at her not with pity, but with pride. Kelsey's grip loosened. His confidence cracked. And the crowd? The crowd wasn't backing down. If anything, they were pushing in closer now, filling the empty space Kelsey had tried to create for himself. People were raising their phones higher, capturing every second. The live streams were spreading faster than he could control. But Kelsey wasn't done. Not yet. His pride wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of this many people. Not when his partner was watching. Not when every instinct in his body was screaming at him to finish what he started. He shoved his hand toward Vanessa again, grabbing her wrist, yanking her arm up like he was about to cuff her. "You're under investigation for obstruction," he barked, trying to regain control of the moment. "Turn around! Now!" But Vanessa didn't move. Instead, she turned her body just enough to face the growing crowd. lifting her voice so everyone could hear. "This officer assaulted me," she declared, her voice ringing clear and strong. "You all saw it. You all heard it. He tore my dress. He humiliated me. And I have done nothing wrong." The crowd roared. People shouted over each other. "She's telling the truth. We got it on camera. This is abuse of power." Kelsey's face burned red. His jaw clenched so hard it looked like his teeth might shatter. He yanked harder on Vanessa's wrist, spinning her around with unnecessary force. But this time, she didn't stumble. She didn't fall apart. She planted her feet solid as a rock, lifting her head high again. And with a voice that carried above every shout, every gasp, every whisper, she dropped a bomb that made Kelsey's blood run cold. "My name is Vanessa Monroe," she said slowly, savoring every word. "Civil rights attorney, federal investigator, lead counsel on the city of Charleston's police corruption case." The crowd exploded. People screamed. Some cheered. Others cursed under their breath, realizing what had just happened. And Kelsey? He froze, like a man who had just seen a ghost, because now it all clicked. The name, the woman, the investigation. He remembered the city-wide memo that had gone out weeks ago, the one warning every department to fully cooperate with the federal inquiry. The one with a single name written in bold at the top, Vanessa Monroe. And here she was, not behind a desk, not in a courtroom, not on television, but standing right in front of him. And he had just torn her dress, in front of dozens of cameras, in front of half the city. Kelsey's breath hitched in his throat. He took an instinctive step back, loosening his grip on her wrist. His mind scrambled for an excuse, for an exit, for anything that could undo the damage. But it was too late. The truth was already out. And standing just a few feet away, Reverend Green crossed his arms over his chest, shaking his head slowly, almost like he was looking at a man digging his own grave. Kelsey's partner, Ruiz, stepped forward, his face pale, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Because what could you say? What could you possibly say when the very woman you just tried to humiliate turns out to be the most powerful legal threat your department has ever faced? And Kelsey knew he wasn't getting out of this, not without the whole city watching. The crowd could feel it, the shift, the electricity in the air. People didn't need law degrees to know what had just happened. They didn't need someone to explain it to them. They had seen it with their own eyes. They had heard every word that had just come out of Vanessa Monroe's mouth. Civil rights attorney, federal investigator, lead counsel on the police corruption case. And just like that, Brad Kelsey's whole world began to close in on him. He could hear the whispers in the crowd getting louder, turning into shouts. He could see people's faces change, from shocked to furious, from scared to bold. Dozens of phones pointed directly at him now, broadcasting this moment to anyone and everyone watching online. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum. He wanted to run, but his boots felt glued to the ground. He wanted to fight back, but even he knew it was too late for that. But Kelsey wasn't built to admit defeat, not in front of a crowd like this. Not in front of his partner, not when his entire identity had been wrapped around this badge, this uniform, and the power it gave him over people like her. He clenched his jaw, and did what men like him always do when they've already lost. He doubled down. With one more sharp tug, he ripped Vanessa's arm behind her back, twisting it just enough to make her flinch in pain. He knew it wasn't legal. He knew the cameras were rolling. But Kelsey had snapped. This wasn't about law anymore. This was about pride. The crowd erupted. People screamed. A woman shouted, "She's an investigator. You can't do that." Another man yelled, "Let her go, right now." Phones started moving in closer, some just a few feet from Kelsey's face. But he didn't let go. His breathing turned heavy, loud enough for Vanessa to hear right behind her ear. "You think you can humiliate me in front of this city?" he hissed under his breath. "You think you're better than me because you've got some title?" Vanessa swallowed the pain, biting her lip to keep from wincing, but her mind stayed sharp. She knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was reacting. His fear had turned into rage, and that made him more dangerous than ever. But the crowd wasn't backing down this time. In fact, they were closing in. Reverend Green was already pushing forward, shouting over the noise. "Enough!" his voice roared. "Officer, let her go! You're done! You hear me? You're done!" But Kelsey didn't stop. If anything, he tightened his grip even more. His knuckles turned white as he pressed Vanessa closer to the fountain's stone edge. Vanessa knew she had to keep talking. She had to stay loud, visible, clear. "You're making a mistake," she shouted so the whole street could hear. "This is being recorded. You'll lose your badge for this." Kelsey flinched, just slightly. The words hit him like a slap. But his pride still screamed louder. He looked up, scanning the crowd for anyone who might back him up. His eyes landed on his partner, Ruiz, who stood frozen in place, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Ruiz, get over here," Kelsey barked. "Help me cuff her." But Ruiz didn't move. Not a single step. His face told the whole story. He knew this had already gone too far. He knew there was no coming back from this. He opened his mouth to respond, but closed it again, swallowing hard as the weight of the moment hung between them. And that's when the crowd broke. A group of older women community elders stepped between Kelsey and the rest of the people watching. One of them, a woman with silver braids and a cane, raised her hand toward the officer. "Let her go, son, before you ruin what's left of your life." Her voice cracked like thunder, strong and clear. Kelsey's lip twitched. He tightened his grip one last time, and then he tore. With a violent, humiliating motion, Kelsey grabbed the fabric of Vanessa's dress again, this time ripping it completely down one side, leaving her standing there, shoulder bare, part of her back and side exposed to the entire street. The crowd screamed in outrage. Phones shook in people's hands as they zoomed in closer, capturing every inch of his crime. Someone shouted, "That's assault! That's sexual assault!" Another yelled, "He just tore her clothes off! Arrest him!" Vanessa's hands trembled, but she held herself upright. She refused to cover up, not because she wasn't humiliated, she was, but because covering up would let him win. It would let him reduce her to a victim, and Vanessa Monroe was nobody's victim. She pulled her torn dress back over her shoulder as best she could, standing tall in front of the cameras, in front of the crowd, in front of her city. And then, with a voice like steel, she spoke the words that made Kelsey's knees nearly buckle. "You're finished." And the crowd roared like a wave crashing against the shore. Brad Kelsey stood frozen in place, breathless, realizing for the first time he wasn't the one giving the orders anymore. He could feel them closing in. The crowd wasn't just angry now, they were alive. You could feel the pulse of the street shifting, like something bigger than all of them had just been set in motion. For a moment, it didn't even feel like Charleston anymore. It felt like every city that had ever risen up in the face of injustice. Selma, Birmingham, Minneapolis. You could feel the energy running through the crowd like fire on dry grass. And right in the center of it all stood Vanessa Monroe, torn dress and all, standing taller than she ever had. She didn't flinch. She didn't break. She stood with her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, staring straight through the man who thought he could tear her dignity apart in front of the world. The tension was thicker than the heat rising off the pavement. And then, Reverend Elijah Green stepped forward. Not hurried, not panicked, but with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who had spent a lifetime knowing exactly when to step in and how. The sea of people parted for him, as if the very air itself made room for the weight of who he was. He didn't have to raise his voice this time. He didn't have to shout. His presence alone carried the weight of authority that no badge ever could. And when he finally stood between Vanessa and Kelsey, the street went silent, like the whole world was holding its breath. He didn't look at Kelsey right away. Reverend Green's eyes locked on Vanessa first. His face softened, his fists unclenched, and in that deep, steady voice that sounded like it could move mountains, he spoke only one word, "Nessa." Vanessa's throat tightened. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since she was a little girl sitting on the porch with her father, listening to stories about the marches, the protests, the long nights spent planning the fight for justice. Reverend Green had been part of all of it, and hearing him say her name now, in front of all these people, in this moment, it broke something inside her, but not in the way Kelsey wanted. It broke the fear, it broke the shame, and in its place, it lit a fire. Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she nodded slowly, acknowledging not just the Reverend standing in front of her, but the history standing with him. Reverend Green finally turned to face Kelsey, who was now breathing so hard it looked like he might collapse under his own weight. His face had drained of color, his jaw twitching as he tried to figure out what to do next. But it didn't matter, because the Reverend had already taken control of the moment. With one slow step forward, Green leaned in just enough for Kelsey to hear, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the thick silence. "You have no idea who you just put your hands on, son." Kelsey swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the crowd, looking for a way out, looking for his partner, looking for anything that might save him from what he already knew was coming. But there was no escape. Not this time. Reverend Green didn't wait for a response. He turned back to the crowd, lifting his arms high, calling out with the power of every sermon he'd ever preached. "Y'all see this? You see what happens when power goes unchecked? You see what happens when we let men like this wear a badge and carry a gun?" The crowd roared in agreement, people raising their fists, shouting back with the kind of righteous anger that comes from generations of being told to sit down and stay silent. And then, out of nowhere, Congresswoman Linda Harper appeared at the edge of the crowd, pushing through with her staff right behind her. Her presence hit Kelsey like a freight train. He recognized her face instantly. Everyone did. A sitting member of Congress, a woman who had spent her career fighting police corruption, a woman who had publicly supported Vanessa Monroe's investigation. She didn't wait for anyone to introduce her. She didn't wait for permission to speak. She walked straight into the center of the chaos, standing shoulder to shoulder with Vanessa and Reverend Green. And when she spoke, the street fell silent again. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Vanessa Monroe, federal investigator, lead counsel on the Department of Justice's case against this city's police department." The crowd exploded again, louder than before. Kelsey staggered back a step, like the words had knocked the air clean out of his lungs. But Harper wasn't done. "And this officer," she continued, pointing directly at Kelsey, "has just committed a public assault on a federal investigator, in front of hundreds of witnesses, with dozens of cameras rolling." The gasps were louder this time. People started shouting again, not just at Kelsey, but for his arrest. "Lock him up! Put him in cuffs! Do your job!" Kelsey turned to Ruiz, his last hope. But Ruiz just stood there, frozen in place, shaking his head slowly. He knew it was over, and Kelsey finally knew it, too. You could almost see the gears turning in Kelsey's head. He looked left, then right, but every direction was blocked. Blocked by cameras, blocked by witnesses, blocked by the very community he had spent years looking down on. And standing at the front of it all was Vanessa Monroe, still standing tall, still holding her ground, even as the remains of her torn dress clung to her shoulder. She didn't need to say another word. The entire street already knew who she was. And they knew exactly what Kelsey had just done. Kelsey's lips parted like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Not an order, not a denial, not even a lie. Because what could he possibly say? The evidence was everywhere. In every hand holding a phone. In every voice shouting for justice. In every breathless witness who had watched it all unfold. And standing right there, just feet away, was Congresswoman Linda Harper. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes burned with a quiet fury that made Kelsey feel like the ground was sinking beneath his feet. Ruiz shifted nervously at Kelsey's side. You could see the sweat building on his forehead. He looked like he wanted to disappear, like he regretted ever showing up to work that day. He opened his mouth, glancing nervously toward the Congresswoman, then toward Reverend Green, then back to Vanessa. And finally, he spoke. "Brad," Ruiz whispered, just loud enough for Kelsey to hear. "Let her go." Kelsey's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with disbelief. It was the first time Ruiz had ever called him out in public. Ever. Ruiz swallowed hard and said it again, louder this time. "Let her go." Now, the crowd quieted again, hanging on every word. Kelsey's jaw clenched, his grip tightening on Vanessa's wrist like letting go would be the final nail in his coffin. And maybe it was. But even he knew the alternative was worse. He could almost feel the weight of those cameras, like they were pressing down on his skin, like they could see right through him. And just like that, with a deep, shaky breath, Kelsey let go. Vanessa stepped back immediately, clutching her arm, her breathing heavy but controlled. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. She stood her ground like the street belonged to her now, and in that moment it did. The crowd roared again, louder than ever before. People started pushing forward, demanding answers, demanding accountability. Arrest him, hold him accountable. Where's Internal Affairs? Reverend Green raised his hand, calling for calm, but the people weren't backing down this time. They had seen enough cover-ups, enough swept-under-the-rug moments, enough bad cops walking away like nothing ever happened. And standing in the middle of all that noise, Kelsey felt small for the first time in his life. Really small. Congresswoman Harper stepped closer, looking Kelsey dead in the eye. "You're going to answer for this." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she had already made up her mind. "You'll answer for all of it." Kelsey opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, to say anything, but nothing came out. His throat felt dry, his legs felt weak. His mind, spinning so fast just moments ago, now felt like it was collapsing under its own weight. And then, the crowd parted one more time. Two uniformed officers from another precinct, Internal Affairs, by the look of their badges, stepped forward. You could see the hesitation on their faces, like they couldn't believe what they had just walked into. One of them, a black officer in his 50s, stepped in front of Kelsey, glancing briefly at Vanessa, then at Harper, then back to Kelsey. "Officer Kelsey, step away from the woman." Kelsey didn't move. The officer took another step forward, his voice firmer. "Turn around! Hands behind your back!" The crowd held its breath again. Kelsey glanced at Ruiz, but his partner wasn't looking at him anymore. Ruiz had already stepped back, like he wanted no part of what was coming next. And in that moment, the fear on Kelsey's face was undeniable. He knew he was finished. His hands trembled slightly as he raised them, turning slowly, like every step weighed 1,000 pounds. And when the cuffs clicked around his wrists, the street erupted again, this time not in outrage, but in a raw, overwhelming wave of victory. Cheers, applause, tears, people hugging strangers, people crying in disbelief, people chanting Vanessa's name, and through it all, Vanessa stood silently, her heart pounding, her body still trembling with the adrenaline of everything that had just happened. But when she finally looked up, when her eyes met Reverend Green's, she knew it was over, and the city had seen it all. For a long moment, no one moved. It was like the entire city had hit pause. Officer Kelsey stood there in handcuffs, his face drained of all color, staring down at the pavement like if he didn't make eye contact with anyone, he could somehow disappear. But there was no hiding, not anymore. His name, his face, his crime, they were already all over social media. There were live streams, videos, photos, dozens of them flooding the internet faster than any department could take them down. And standing at the heart of it all was Vanessa Monroe, still catching her breath, still holding herself upright even as the weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on her like a mountain. Reverend Green reached out, placing a steady hand on her shoulder not to comfort her, but to remind her that she wasn't alone, that she never had been, that this moment, this victory, belonged not just to her, but to every voice that had ever been silenced. Congresswoman Harper stepped forward next. You could see the fire still burning in her eyes. She didn't look at Kelsey. She didn't waste a single second giving him even one more ounce of her attention. She turned to Vanessa instead, lowering her voice so only she and a few others could hear. "You just changed everything," Harper whispered. Vanessa swallowed hard. She didn't feel like she had changed anything. Not yet. Her hands were still shaking. Her dress was still torn. Her skin still burned with the sting of public humiliation. But deep down, somewhere beneath all that pain, she knew Harper was right. This moment was bigger than her. And the crowd? They were still standing, still watching, still waiting to see what would happen next. Vanessa took a step forward, clearing her throat, searching for the strength to speak. And when she did, her voice came out a little shaky at first, but it grew stronger with every word. "You all saw what happened here today," she said, loud enough for the entire street to hear. "You saw the abuse. You saw the power that was taken and the power that we took back." The crowd leaned in, silent now, hanging on every word. "This isn't just about me," she continued. "It's about every single person who's ever been stopped, humiliated, disrespected, or harmed, simply for existing." People nodded. Some clapped softly. Others wiped their eyes. Vanessa glanced down at the ripped fabric hanging from her shoulder. She could have tried to hide it. She could have turned her back to the crowd. But she didn't. She stood tall. "This uniform doesn't make you untouchable," she said, her voice rising with each word. "A badge doesn't give you the right to strip someone's dignity. The street erupted in cheers. People raised their fists. Some shouted her name. And then, she turned to Kelsey. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked him in the eye. "You picked the wrong woman," she said softly, but loud enough for him to hear. "And you picked the wrong city." Kelsey flinched, turning his face toward the ground again, trying to escape the weight of it all. But there was no escape. His career was over, his power gone, and everyone knew it. The internal affairs officers didn't wait for permission. They grabbed Kelsey by the arm, leading him away through the parted crowd. People jeered as he passed, but not Vanessa. She didn't move. She didn't celebrate his fall, because this moment wasn't about him. It was about every person in that crowd who had seen something they would never forget. It was about every young person watching on their phones, realizing that they had a voice and that it mattered. Reverend Green stepped up beside her again, his voice low, almost like he was praying more than speaking. "Your father would be proud," he whispered. Vanessa's throat tightened. She bit her lip to keep the tears from falling. But they came anyway. Not tears of pain, but of release, of victory, of something finally breaking open after years of carrying the weight of a broken system on her back. Harper leaned in, offering her jacket, gently draping it over Vanessa's shoulders, covering the tear in her dress. And when Vanessa turned to look at her, the congresswoman just nodded with a small, knowing smile. "You just started something they can't stop," she whispered. And as Vanessa turned back to face the Crowder city, she knew she wasn't just the woman who stood up to Officer Kelsey. She was the face of something bigger now, something louder, something unstoppable. And this was only the beginning. For the first time in over an hour, Vanessa let herself breathe. The energy on the street had shifted again. The anger was still there. The fire was still burning, but something else had taken over now. Something calmer, heavier, something that felt like resolution. Kelsey was gone. The sound of his footsteps, the clink of the cuffs, the angry mutters under his breath as they led him away, all of that had faded into the distance. But Vanessa could still feel the moment hanging in the air, like the crowd wasn't ready to leave, like they knew this wasn't over. Not really. And they were right. Because while Kelsey might have been escorted off the street, Vanessa knew better than to think the fight had ended with one arrest. No, this was just the surface. The real work, the kind that didn't make headlines, the kind that didn't go viral, that was still ahead. She pulled Harper's jacket a little tighter around her shoulders and glanced toward the Reverend. He was standing just a few steps away, watching her with the kind of look that felt more like a passing of the torch than anything else. "You ready for what's next?" he asked, his voice steady, almost soft. Vanessa swallowed hard and nodded. "Been ready," she whispered back. And that was the truth, because long before Kelsey ever grabbed her wrist, long before he humiliated her in front of hundreds of people, Vanessa Monroe had been preparing for this moment. Every late night in law school, every case she took that nobody else wanted, every closed-door meeting she sat through with police leaders who smirked in her faces she had been building toward this day, the crowd was still buzzing, people coming up to her one by one offering their thanks, their support, their tears. Some asked to shake her hand, some just stood in front of her, lost for words. But their eyes said it all. And then, someone handed her a phone. It was still recording, a live stream, thousands of people watching in real time. The screen showed hearts and comments flying by so fast they blurred together. People from Charleston, people from other states, some even from outside the country. "Vanessa," someone whispered behind her, "they're asking if you have anything you want to say before the feed ends." Vanessa looked at the screen. She could feel her heart pounding again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was something bigger. So she took the phone, raised it just a little, and with her voice clear and steady, she spoke directly to every single person watching. "My name is Vanessa Monroe," she began, her words slow and intentional. "And today, you all saw what too many people have experienced for far too long." The comments kept flying by. She tightened her grip on the phone, breathing deep before continuing. "But this isn't just about today," she said. "And it's not just about me." She paused, glancing around at the people still standing with her, Reverend Green, Congresswoman Harper, the families, the elders, the young people. "It's about all of us," she continued. "It's about every voice that's been silenced, every person who's been told to sit down and stay quiet. It's about showing them we're not going anywhere. Cheers erupted again from the crowd. We are done accepting apologies with no accountability, she added. We are done watching people with power abuse it in plain sight. And we are done letting anyone tell us that our dignity, our lives, are negotiable. The comments exploded. People cheering, people crying, people typing from every corner of the country. We hear you, Vanessa. Keep fighting. We stand with you. Vanessa swallowed back the lump in her throat, pushing forward one more time. To every young person watching this, she said, her voice shaking slightly. Know this, you have a voice, and it's powerful. Don't ever let them make you feel small. Don't ever let them make you feel like you don't matter. She paused again, her eyes welling up. And when they try to tear you down, you stand back up, you stand taller, and you let them see exactly who you are. She lowered the phone just a little, taking a breath. Because today, she whispered, Charleston stood up, and we're not sitting back down. And with that, she ended the live stream. People clapped, people cheered, people started chanting her name again, louder than before. And for the first time since this all started, Vanessa felt herself smile. Not a forced smile, not the kind you put on to hide the pain, but a real one. The kind that comes when you know you did something that mattered. And as the sun began to set over King Street, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Vanessa Monroe stood in the middle of the street surrounded by her people, wrapped in their voices, lifted by their hope, because this was her city. And now, they all knew it. But just when it felt like the day had finally settled, Kelsey made one last move. He wasn't done. Not yet. Somehow, even in cuffs, even with 2 officers on either side of him, Brad Kelsey still believed he could turn this around. Because men like him, they don't go down without taking one more shot. One more attempt to twist the story in their favor. As the internal affairs officers started to walk him toward their patrol car, Kelsey stopped dead in his tracks. His voice rang out, sharp and bitter. "This is a setup!" he shouted loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You people have no idea who she really is!" The street fell into an eerie hush. Vanessa turned her head slowly, locking eyes with him one more time. Kelsey, breathing hard, kept going. "She's been coming after this department for months," he barked. "She's a liar. She's just here to make a name for herself. This is all political theater. You're all being played." The internal affairs officers yanked on his arm, trying to move him forward, but Kelsey leaned back, refusing to go quietly. "She's not a hero," he shouted again, spit flying from his lips. "She's a fraud. She's been setting us up since day one." The crowd started to shift again, some gasping, others shaking their heads. Kelsey saw his opening. He saw the hesitation, and he pounced. "She's lying to all of you," he bellowed. "This isn't about justice. It's about power. She wants to tear this city apart. She wants to destroy the police, destroy everything we built. You're all too blind to see it." The officers tried to drag him away again, but he jerked his body toward the crowd one last time. "Ask her," he roared. "Ask her who she really works for. Ask her what she's hiding." For a split second, everything froze. The voice quieted. The crowd shifted nervously. You could feel the doubt creeping in, spreading like smoke in a crowded room. Vanessa stood still, her heart pounding. Not from fear, but from rage, because she knew exactly what Kelsey was doing. He was trying to flip the script, trying to paint himself as the victim, trying to turn her into the villain, and if she didn't handle this moment right now, everything they had just fought for could fall apart. So she took a step forward, then another, and another, until she was standing just a few feet from Kelsey, close enough to look him dead in the eye. The crowd held its breath, and when she spoke, her voice didn't shake. "You're right," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have been coming after this department. For months. For years, even. And you know why?" She took another step closer, her face calm, her words cutting sharper than any blade. "Because people like you," she hissed, "have been hiding behind that badge for far too long." Kelsey's face twitched. Vanessa kept going. "I don't need to tear this city apart," she said. "You already did that. With every lie you told, every person you humiliated, every family you tore apart, you did that, not me." The crowd started to murmur again, louder this time. Vanessa turned, her voice rising. "And if any of you have doubts about who I am," she called out to the people, "go ahead, look me up. My record's public. My work's public. My name's been on every document, every filing, every hearing." She pointed at Kelsey. "He's the one who hides behind closed doors. He's the one who counts on you not knowing the truth." She looked back at Kelsey, her voice dropping just enough to make every word hit harder. "And the truth is this. You thought you could tear me down, but all you did was prove me right." The crowd erupted again, louder than before. The internal affairs officers didn't wait this time. They pulled Kelsey back toward the car, their grip tighter, their faces colder. Kelsey fought for another word, another breath, another chance to defend himself, but nobody was listening anymore, because Vanessa had already won. As Kelsey disappeared into the back seat of the cruiser, Vanessa stood in the middle of the street, her fists clenched at her sides. She could still feel the heat rising in her chest, the adrenaline pumping through her veins, but she knew it was done. He was finished, and as the door slammed shut on Kelsey's last chance to control the story, Vanessa Monroe turned back to her city, her people, and let out the breath she'd been holding all day. The cruiser pulled away slowly, its flashing lights fading into the distance as Kelsey disappeared down the street. But the people? They didn't move. No one scattered. No one went home. If anything, the crowd felt bigger, stronger, like they had finally woken up to something they could never unsee. Vanessa turned, scanning the faces in front of her. Some were angry, some were emotional, but all of them were still there. Every step she had taken that day had brought her to this moment, and now they were all waiting for what came next. Reverend Green stepped closer, lowering his voice, so only she and a few standing nearby could hear. "You've got the city's attention now," he said. "You ready to lead them?" Vanessa nodded slowly, but she knew she couldn't do it alone, so she raised her hands high, signaling for silence. And when the noise died down, she spoke not with anger, but with purpose. "Listen to me," she called out, her voice carrying across the street like a wave. "What you saw here today wasn't just one bad cop on a power trip. What you saw is why we fight." People leaned in. Cameras came back up. "We didn't come here today expecting this to happen. But now that it has, we don't walk away. We don't let this die in a news cycle. We don't wait for the city to sweep it under the rug." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We organize. We demand action. We make sure every single person in power hears our voices, not just tonight, but tomorrow, next week, next month, and every day after that." The crowd cheered. Someone yelled, "We're with you, Vanessa!" Another person shouted, "Lead us!" Vanessa swallowed back the lump in her throat. She could feel the pressure building, the responsibility, but she also felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Congresswoman Harper stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Vanessa once again. She raised her voice, addressing the crowd with the steady confidence only a seasoned leader could deliver. "We are demanding a full investigation," Harper announced. "Not just into Officer Kelsey, but into every complaint that's been ignored, every report that's been buried, every officer who thought they could abuse their power without consequences." More cheers broke out. People raised their fists. Some chanted Vanessa's name again. Harper turned to Vanessa, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And this woman right here," she continued, "is going to lead that charge. She's already been doing the work behind the scenes, but now you all know her face, you know her name, and together, we're going to hold this city accountable." Vanessa felt her chest tighten. It was overwhelming. Yes, but it was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. It was about every single person standing on that street. The crowd started chanting again, louder this time. "Justice for all! Justice for all!" Reverend Green raised both hands high, calling for quiet once more. His voice, weathered but powerful, carried through the night air. "We march," he announced. "Tonight, we don't go home. We don't back down. We march for every voice that's been silenced. We march for every person who's ever been told their life doesn't matter." The crowd roared in agreement, and just like that, the energy shifted again, not into chaos, but into purpose. People started forming lines. Families held hands. Elders led the way. Young people carried signs, some handmade, right there on the spot. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. But it didn't need to be. It was real. Vanessa stood at the front, sandwiched between Harper and Reverend Green. Her hands were still shaking, but she didn't stop moving. Step after step, they marched. down King Street, past the courthouse, past the police station, past every symbol of the system that had just tried to break her in front of the world. People watched from sidewalks, from windows, from balconies. Some joined the march, some just stood silently, tears streaming down their faces. And as they marched, Vanessa could feel it, the power of unity, the weight of history pressing against her back, like the voices of every ancestor who had come before her. When they reached the city square, the crowd finally slowed, gathering in the open space beneath the towering statue of a long-forgotten historical figure. Vanessa stepped forward again, raising her hands for silence one last time. She turned, looking out over the sea of faces in front of her, faces that now carried her story with them. And when she spoke, it wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for the headlines. It was for every single person who had stood with her that day. "We're just getting started," she whispered. And the crowd roared one final time. They had marched for hours. No one had planned it that way, but no one had cared either. When a community rises together, you don't check your watch. You don't count the miles. You just keep going. And that's exactly what they did. By the time the crowd began to slow, the sky had turned from golden to dark. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting a soft glow on the faces of neighbors who had never stood this close together before. People who normally passed each other on sidewalks without a word were now holding hands, standing shoulder to shoulder, united by what they had witnessed and by what they had just done together. And right there, in the heart of it all, was Vanessa Monroe. She hadn't left the front, not for 1 second. Every step had been heavier than the last, her body aching from the adrenaline that had long since worn off. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, not when she felt the weight of an entire city leaning on her. Not when she knew the world was still watching. When the march finally came to a stop in front of City Hall, people began to gather against them, sitting on the steps, others holding up their signs, all of them waiting for what came next. Vanessa stood there, breathing hard, staring up at the building in front of her. The place where so many decisions had been made about them, but never with them. The place where power had sat behind closed doors for as long as she could remember, but not tonight. Tonight, power was standing in the street. Reverend Green stepped up beside her again. His voice was softer now, worn from hours of leading chants, but still strong enough to steady the air around them. "This is it, Nessa," he whispered. "You ready?" She didn't answer right away. She just nodded, swallowing the lump that had been sitting in her throat all night. She turned to face the people, raising her voice once more. "We're not going home empty-handed," she declared. "We came here for action, and that's what we're going to get." The crowd roared in agreement. Before anyone could ask what she meant, Vanessa turned toward the glass doors of City Hall. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for backup. She started walking up the steps like she owned the place. And in that moment, she did. People gasped, then cheered louder, surging forward until hundreds of them were gathered on the steps, filling every inch of space from top to bottom. A security guard appeared behind the glass, looking nervous, like he wasn't sure whether to stop her or hold the door open. Vanessa raised her hand, signaling for the crowd to wait. She approached the guard calmly, her voice firm but respectful. "I need to speak with the city manager," she said. "Tonight." The guard stammered. "Two don't think they're here." "Call them," she interrupted. "Let them know the people are waiting. And we're not leaving." The guard glanced nervously at the sea of people behind her. He nodded quickly and disappeared into the building. Vanessa turned back to the crowd. She didn't need a megaphone. Her voice was enough. "We're staying right here," she called out, "until every official in that building knows we're not letting this go." The crowd cheered again, settling in like they were preparing to spend the whole night camped out on the steps of power itself. And then, the glass doors opened. City officials began to appear one by one, some in suits, some looking like they had just been woken from their sleep. The city manager, the police commissioner, the mayor's chief of staff. They all stepped out onto the top step, looking down at the sea of people who had just brought the fight to their front door. One of them started to speak, but Vanessa raised her hand again. "No," she said firmly, "you don't speak, we do." And just like that, she turned toward the crowd once more. "This is the moment we hold them accountable," she announced. "This is the moment we tell them what justice looks like." People nodded, some raised their fists. And Vanessa? She started calling people forward. One by one, Victims and families who had been silenced for years stood on those steps and spoke their truth. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, people who had lost everything to a broken system, finally getting the chance to be heard. And with every story that was told, with every name that was spoken, the officials standing on those steps could feel their power slipping. Because this wasn't just a protest. This wasn't just a march. This was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. A year later, the city looked the same on the surface. The old streets of Charleston still carried the sounds of church bells on Sunday mornings. The waterfront still drew in tourists with its history and charm. And the annual Civil Rights Parade, it was back again, bigger than ever. But if you paid attention, if you really looked, you'd realize something had changed. People stood a little taller now. They looked each other in the eye a little longer. There was a new kind of energy in the air like. The city had finally started to believe that justice wasn't just a word written on banners or carved on old statues. It was possible, it was real, and it was happening. And at the front of this year's parade, standing on the same stage where she had once watched in silence, stood Vanessa Monroe. She wasn't standing as a spectator this time. She wasn't standing as a guest. She was standing as Charleston's official civil rights advisor. The city had made it official. The council had voted unanimously. After months of meetings, hearings, and demands from the people, Vanessa had been appointed to lead the city's newly formed Justice and Accountability Commission. It wasn't just a title, it was a mission. And the people standing below her on the street, they knew exactly why she had earned it. They hadn't forgotten that day. They hadn't forgotten what Kelsey tried to do. They hadn't forgotten who stood up when it mattered most. Vanessa looked out over the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest. But this time it wasn't fear, it was purpose. Reverend Green stood off to the side, smiling proudly, his arms crossed over his chest. And beside him, Congresswoman Harper gave Vanessa a small nod, silently reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. Vanessa stepped forward to the microphone, and when she spoke, the city leaned in. "Last year," she began, "many of you stood right here with me. You marched with me. You demanded justice with me. And you showed this city that change isn't just something we talk about. It's something we make happen." The crowd cheered, clapping and raising their hands. She took a deep breath, steadying her voice as she continued. "But our work didn't end that night," she said. "It started that night. And today, we're here to show the world that Charleston isn't going backward. We're moving forward." More cheers. Louder this time. Vanessa paused, scanning the faces in front of her. Some were familiar. Some were strangers. But all of them felt like family now. "This commission we've built," she explained, "is not just a title. It's not just a department. It's a promise. A promise to every person who's ever felt invisible in their own city. A promise that we will keep fighting for justice, for accountability, for every voice that's been silenced." The crowd roared again, louder than before. "And to those who still think they can abuse their power," she added, her voice dropping just slightly, "let me remind you, we're watching, we're recording, we're showing up, and we're not going anywhere." The people rose to their feet, chanting her name again. But this time, Vanessa didn't wave them quiet. She let them celebrate, because this victory wasn't hers alone. It belonged to all of them. After the speech, Vanessa stepped down from the stage, walking through the crowd with her head held high. People reached out to shake her hand, to hug her, to thank her. And through it all, she kept moving forward toward the place where it had all started. The fountain. The very spot where Kelsey had tried to break her. It stood there, unchanged. But Vanessa? She was different now. She walked up to the stone edge, running her fingers along its surface, remembering every second of that day, the fear, the humiliation, the anger. But she also remembered what came after. The people who stood up, the voices that rose, the city that refused to back down. Reverend Green joined her, standing quietly by her side. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. After a moment, Vanessa finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" she whispered. The Reverend smiled. "It feels right," he answered. Vanessa nodded, taking one last look around the square. The march had ended. The speeches were over. But the fight? The fight was just getting started. And as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the city she loved, Vanessa Monroe knew one thing for certain. They had changed Charleston forever, and no one, not even men like Brad Kelsey, could ever take that back. If this story has shown us anything, it's that courage doesn't come from a badge, a title, or the spotlight. True courage comes from knowing who you are, standing firm when the world expects you to bow, and using your voice even when it shakes. Vanessa Monroe didn't choose that moment. She didn't wake up asking for a fight. But when injustice stood in her way, she didn't back down. And friends, sometimes that's exactly how life comes at us. The hardest moments show up when we least expect them. But here's the lesson: you're never too young or too old to make a difference. Your story, your voice, your presence, they matter more than you know. You may think the world has already heard enough, but someone needs to hear it again. Someone needs to see you stand up. Because when you do, you remind the next generation what real leadership looks like, not the kind that seeks power, but the kind that protects dignity. And if this message spoke to you tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a little reminder that their voice still matters. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.